welcome to the Something About Sandy Film Fight Podcast with your host, Ash Baker.
It's that time again. Welcome to the Something About Sandy Film Fight Podcast, the podcast that takes the best and worst films on a given theme and puts them in an on-again, off-again relationship for 10 years to see which one comes out on top. I'm your host Ash Baker, and let's catch up with our friends and get cracking, shall we? This week's theme is...
Ross vs. Rachel, Part 1. We were on a break!
Unless you've lived under a rock for the past 20-odd years, you'll probably be aware of the cultural phenomenon that was the 90s sitcom Friends, which followed the trials and tribulations of 6 20-something New Yorkers and made household names, and no doubt millionaires, out of the stars. I suspect you'll have watched an episode or two. Or, if you're like me, you'll have seen them all so many times you know all the lines to all the episodes off by heart. Damn you, Netflix, for adding Friends to your database! Anyway, one of the central storylines that ran throughout the 10 years of the show was the relationship between Ross and Rachel. Ross liked Rachel. Rachel liked Ross. They dated. They broke up. They got back together. They broke up. They got married. They got divorced. They had a baby. They considered getting back together, but didn't. Then they finally end up getting back together after all. When you put it like that, it sounds exhausting. But drip-fed week by week, it was gripping stuff. But this is a film podcast, so I'm quite interested in what the actors did outside of Friends. How did they leverage their superstardom? Did they cash in with easy films playing roles similar to their Friends characters? Or did they really try and challenge both themselves and the expectations people had of them? Because I'm looking at two people for this theme, I've split this into 2 episodes. So this week we're looking at the worst effort by Jennifer Aniston against the worst effort by David Schwimmer. So that means it's 2005's Rumour Has It up against 1998's Since You've Been Gone. Next week we'll pick up the best by these 2 actors. And for clarity, when I say worst and best, I'm basing this on the Rotten Tomatoes ratings for the films. Although I've had to fudge the selection a little, as David Schwimmer has fewer films, so technically I picked Aniston's 3rd or 4th worst film, but it was the one that had the closest score to Schwimmer's. Anyway, that's boring stats stuff. Let's get on with the podcast. Although be careful of those spoilers. A bit like Ugly Naked Guy being poked with a big stick through the window, those spoilers can be a bit irritating if you haven't seen the films. First up, it's Rumour Has It, and here are the facts.
Year of release.
2005.
Directed by...
Rob Reiner.
Starring...
Jennifer Aniston, Mark Ruffalo, Shirley MacLaine, and Kevin Costner.
Running time.
1 hour and 37 minutes.
Current Rotten Tomatoes rating.
19%.
Budget.
$70 million.
Worldwide box office takings.
$88.9 million.
Where to watch.
It's on Netflix and Amazon Prime. You're spoiled for choice on this one. Rumour Has It tells the story of the quote-unquote true rumour behind The Graduate, the famous tale of seduction and predatory older people ensnaring their younger prey. Jennifer Aniston plays Sarah, who has never felt like she fitted in with her family and their country club neighbours in Pasadena. Whilst at her sister's wedding, she hears something about her mother's past which may explain it all. Searching for the truth, she seeks out Beau Burrows, a carefree charmer who she quickly finds herself falling for, giving her more questions than answers. Will she find out who she truly is? Will it change her life for the better? Will she end up making the right decision? What a strange film this is. It starts with a pretty irritating voiceover from Aniston explaining the whole backstory, with the older woman sleeping with the younger man, who ended up going with her daughter, and he was friends with the bloke who wrote The Graduate, and blah-de-blah-de-blah. The film assumes we care a lot more about the intricacies of the love lives of these people than we actually do, and I suppose that was the first problem. It's just incredibly inert and dull. I didn't care for or about any of the characters involved. It wasn't that I hated them, I was just so unfussed about them. Get together, don't get together, not really bothered. I found it so strange that I just felt nothing for them, even though it has some great actors in the cast. The film is put together in quite a workaday fashion, with the only bit of flair coming from an extended motif of the grandmother watching things unfold while stylishly smoking a cigarette. But after that, there was very little of note. Also, the song choices were very on the nose, some of them literally singing the plot. It reminded me of that scene from Basketball, the Trey Parker and Matt Stone film, where the song on the radio gets very specific with the character listening to it. I struggled to put my finger on exactly what was wrong with this film, and I think in a way that is the problem itself. The fact that it's so nothing. Jennifer Aniston is a star and has bags of charisma and screen presence, so why is none of it on show here? It's such a shame given her time on Friends and other films when she's done some interesting things. It felt like taking this film was a safe option for her after finishing Friends, although she would eventually try to actively stamp out any girl next doorness with later films such as Horrible Bosses and We're the Millers. Even the usually reliable Mark Ruffalo was struggling to inject any life into this film. To be fair to him, he's playing a lawyer who is supposed to be the slightly boring and safe option, although this in itself presented a problem, as he was kind of halfway between. No way near boring or safe enough for us to really side with Sarah as she questions it all, but not so dazzlingly interesting enough for us to completely disagree with Sarah either. Perhaps Ruffalo was miscast here, and his natural charm is fighting against what the script requires him to be. The second problem is that the central storyline is just disgusting. She sleeps with someone who also slept with her mother and her grandmother. What? Reading back through my notes, I just wrote, about 10 times, especially when Beau's son turns up and it kind of suggests it could happen with another generation. What even would you call that? A love square? Love pentagon? The fact that I have to think about it creeps me out. Okay, so Beau says he's sterile, so he couldn't have possibly been her father. But the fact that the film dangles that in front of you is just really creepy. And regardless of whether he was her father, why the hell would you want to be sloppy thirds to your own mother and grandmother? I know that's kind of what the film is getting at. You know, history repeating itself, a new take on The Graduate, he's the romantic and venturous option, blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't get us away from the fact that it's just icky. The biggest problem, though, is that I'm not really sure why this film exists. Don't get me wrong, I can kind of understand the appeal of trying to dig deeper into a story that is so iconic, such as The Graduate. I remember once reading a book called The Wild Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, which aimed to give more background to Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre by telling the story of the wife in the attic and how she got there. In that instance, it really shed light and gave voice to a character who was reduced to just being the mad old lady in the loft in the original text, although English scholars might have to correct me there, as I've never actually read Jane Eyre. In Rumour Has It, it takes the original concept and doesn't add anything insightful or interesting to the story, just uses it as a plot device to tell a fairly weird rom-com. However, there were some positives in this film. Kevin Costner is Beau Burrows, and he just oozes confidence and charm. Even though I didn't like the whole premise of the film, I feel he was cast very well, as you can kind of see why Sarah might fall for him. His appearance in this film reminded me a little of when Richard Gere turned up in the second Best Exotic Marigold Hotel film, and the camera nearly fell off its stand because of just how gorgeous he was. It wasn't quite like that here, but the film certainly plays up to the fact that they've got a handsome older man, and I think if it was anyone else, save maybe Gere himself, it would have come across as much worse. The best performance by a mile, though, is Shirley MacLaine, playing Sarah's grandmother, although don't call her grandmother. She doesn't steal every scene, more puts a bag over its head and kidnaps it for a massive ransom. She is simply terrific, having a great time as a sarcastic diva social commentator, and she gets all the best lines. A particular favourite of ours was Sarah turns up after it all comes crashing down, and the grandmother says, "Come in, I've put on a pot of bourbon." Costner and MacLaine do actually meet at one point, which was exciting, although the film completely ruined it by playing the theme from The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, as they size each other up. We get it. Two big hitters going to slug it out. You don't have to slap the metaphor around our faces. The rest of the cast are pretty forgettable, and the younger sister is just really annoying. Essentially, everyone in the cast, including Aniston and Ruffalo, are completely outshone by MacLaine and Costner. This film just had no lasting impact on me. I didn't love it, rarely laughed, especially when MacLaine wasn't on screen. But similarly, I didn't hate it either. I just felt nothing for it, apart from a slightly ill feeling in the pit of my stomach at the relationship crisscrossing. Therefore, My official rating for this film is...
Ugh.
Next up, it's Since You've Been Gone. And yes, you've guessed it by now, it's the facts.
Year of release.
1998.
Directed by...
David Schwimmer.
Starring...
Philip Rayburn-Smith, Joey Slotnick, Joy Gregory, and David Schwimmer.
Running time.
1 hour, 36 minutes.
Current Rotten Tomatoes rating.
20%.
Budget.
The internet doesn't seem to want to tell me this information about made-for-TV films.
Worldwide box office takings.
Nor this info either.
Where to watch.
You'll have to rent this one. Since You've Been Gone follows the exploits of a group of late-20s Chicagoans who head to their 10-year high school reunion. Can they impress their old classmates with how well their life has gone? Can they settle old scores and get some closure and move on with their lives? Or will it come crashing down around their ears? The story supposedly centres on a paediatric doctor called Kevin, although you might want to tell the producers that, as he's not shown anywhere on the poster. Philip Rayburn-Smith is completely charisma-free as the grumpy doctor who is supposedly dreading the reunion due to a final day bust-up with one of his classmates, Pat Prince, who is now a homeopathic practitioner. We learn later on that Kevin's bad mood is actually caused by a devastating day at the office, which is quite an interesting plot point, but his characterisation was so flat and dull that by this point I'd completely stopped caring about what happened to him, which is a real shame. His resumption of his rivalry with the homeopath was just a bit silly too. It was set up that Kevin was the victim, but he was so annoying and petty that, to be honest, I was completely rooting for Pat when he finally lamped him on towards the end. The man who does make it onto the poster is Joey Slotnick as Zane, a songwriter whose most famous hit was given to another artist to record instead of him, and he can't quite get over it. Slotnick played the world-weary musician well, but was given very little to do with the script, apart from a nice song towards the end. Lara Flynn Boyle plays a sociopathic character called Grace, who constantly disrupts proceedings with schoolyard pranks. This character could have been used to so much greater effect, for example to bring people down a peg or two and puncture people's pomposity, but her antics come off as really mean and horrible instead of funny. Flynn Boyle plays her with a deadpan malice, although I would have preferred a little more spark, as her dispassion for life meant we could never engage with her in a way that I think we needed to excuse some of her behaviour. She's in a sex scene towards the end, but unfortunately her performance meant it came across as pretty steamless, which I suspect is not what they were going for when they put the two bad characters together. Certainly not worth getting the R rating for. Terry Hatcher is fine, as someone who is putting on a facade of her life being amazing, but her old school pals see right through it, and she actually starts to have a much better time when she relaxes and starts being herself. She looks great as an over-the-top Audrey Hepburn parody in orange fake tan, boob-augmenting dress, and constant chain-smoking using a cigarette holder. I feel the script didn't really allow her to shine, though, but she did her best with what she had. The only character I actually cared about in this was Duncan, with David Catlin playing him with a sweet naivety and vulnerability that gets everyone on side. He's such a sweetie, and I was pleased he got the girl in the end. And after that, there's pretty much every stereotype you'd expect in a high school reunion film. The annoying new parents, the self-help guru, the bad boy who's still a bit of a wrong-un because he has an earring and smokes, the woman who's still a loser after all these years later, blah, blah, blah. You may be thinking, this was picked as David Schwimmer's film. Why hasn't Ash mentioned him yet? Good question. David Schwimmer is hardly in this film, although you wouldn't know that from the poster, where he's front and centre, or the trailer, which I think basically includes all his scenes. I didn't count up Schwimmer's appearances, but it can't have been much more than 10 minutes. However, he did direct it, so I'm allowing it to count in this week's comparison. Well, if I didn't, it would mean I'd had to sit through this incredibly dull movie for absolutely no reason at all, and that would have made me very sad indeed. When Schwimmer is in it, he's basically just been Ross from Friends, although focusing in more on the self-important and obnoxious side that Ross could sometimes show in Friends. The script wasn't really there to allow him to develop the character any further than that, to be honest. The only thing of note from him is a running gag about people putting a sign on his back. It's so lazy, I'm surprised they could even be bothered to write it into the script. It just added so little. Schwimmer was only really there as a cameo, which is kind of appropriate, as there are 7 other cameos too, listing like a who's who of 80s and 90s pop culture, with the likes of Molly Ringwald, Jennifer Grey and Liev Schreiber turning up. It was made as a TV movie, so maybe the hope was that if someone was channel surfing and saw, for example, that the photographer is Jerry Springer, they might just leave it on out of intrigue. I read that Schwimmer turned down the chance to be in Men in Black so he could direct and star in this film as a favour to his old Chicago theatre buddies. And when you learn it was done as a favour, it starts to make a bit more sense. I think it's very charitable that Schwimmer used his star power to A, get the movie made, and B, get all these superstar cameos to turn up for an extremely workaday script. It reminds me of Eminem's promise to his rap friends in Detroit that if he made it big he'd come back and get them, and he kept his promise by forming D12. But D12 was by far his worst and laziest work, which makes the comparison here even more appropriate. Since You've Been Gone wasn't bad, and I didn't hate it, but it was so dull. It felt like my partner had invited me to their high school reunion, but they'd gone off chatting with other people all night, so I was left on the outside looking in, desperately counting down the minutes until you're allowed to leave. There were no likeable or relatable characters to draw you in and make you care about any of the storylines. Although it did make me want to go back and watch Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion. Maybe that could have been another topic, Friends actors who have appeared in school reunion movies. I'll note that down for later. Anyway, my official rating for this film is...
The best bits are all in the trailer.
Biggest meanie of the week.
Only one clear option this week, and it's Grace from Since You've Been Gone. The chewing gum in the hair, breaking the speakers, putting superglue on a toilet seat. The list of her pranks is endless. So Grace is this week's meanie of the week. What an audio treat for you. It's Top Trumps time again.
Top trumps, top trumps, top trumps, top trumps, top trumps.
Who's going to win it this week? Let's find out, shall we? Our first category is...
Party poopers.
Sarah is a bit of a Debbie Downer at several points in this film, especially at her sister's wedding. However, Since You've Been Gone has several, with Dr. Kevin as well as a lecturer who just can't catch a break, and obviously Grace for being a big fat meanie, so this round has to go to Since You've Been Gone. Category 2.
Friends references.
Since You've Been Gone basically has an appearance from Ross Geller, but rumour has it takes this round as there are several jokes about Friends, including someone saying Aniston should be a hair model, in reference to the Rachel being so popular in the 90s, and several people asking her if she's going to get on the plane or not. So rumour has it takes this round. 3.
Stylish smoking.
Terry Hatcher has the elegant cigarette holder for her smoking, but Shirley MacLaine furiously chain smoking is a sight to behold. Plus I wouldn't want to be the one that told her she hadn't won, so rumour has it takes this round. 4. The sex scene in Since You've Been Gone is a little gross as they play with sweets and food throughout, but rumour has it absolutely walks this round. It was just plain wrong. 5.
Top stars in smaller roles.
Rumour has it can boast of having Kevin Costner and Shirley MacLaine, but with 7 listed cameos plus Schwimmer, Since You've Been Gone easily takes this round. Bonus round.
Songs with the same name.
Okay, I'm cheating a little bit here, but it's my podcast so I can do what I like. Both of these films share their name with songs, and if you're anything like me, you have to sing the songs when you mention a film. So which is better? Rumour Has It by Adele is a great track. But there are actually 2 songs that come to mind for Since You've Been Gone, both the 80s dad rock version by Rainbow
Since you've been gone.
and the noughties pop version by Kelly Clarkson.
Since you've been gone.
I prefer the Adele track, but on volume alone, I'm giving the win to Since You've Been Gone, although it's just a half point as it's a bonus round.
And the winner is...
Very close here, but rumour has it just squeaks it with a score of 3 to 2.5. And now for the final summary. I suppose for any actor who became famous for a particular show, you must feel the pressure with every career choice you make. How do you show off your skills and range as an actor while staying true to what made you famous in the first place? Just look at the kids from Harry Potter, who have spent most of their post-Potter career desperately trying to do weird and wonderful projects to differentiate themselves from the thing that made them famous, to varying levels of success. Both Jennifer Aniston and David Schwimmer have done projects that have been stretched them creatively, although unfortunately these 2 films are not them, showing that no matter how big a star you are, you can still produce the odd duffer. I think the biggest shame about both of these films is that they're just so bland. In Friends, these 2 actors are so charismatic, funny, and endearing, despite their characters' flaws, and we grew to love them over the years. But in these films, neither of them managed to recapture any of the magic from the TV show and breathe life into their respective projects. It makes you worry that Aniston and Schwimmer are actually pretty ordinary actors, and it was the strength of the Friends script that pulled them through. Whilst the script was without doubt brilliant, you'd hope that the actors brought some of their own personality to it. I am praying, though, that I'm proven wrong when we look at the best films next week. I suppose the main issue with these films is, why do they exist? Creatively, they're pretty poor, so it can only be to cash in on their star's fame, although I don't suppose we should be particularly surprised about that. This was particularly true for Since You've Been Gone. It was a clear cash grab, and it's pretty blatant too, with the shameless references to all the cameos and how it had been marketed. To be fair to rumour has it, whilst I mostly thought it was mediocre, there were some flashes of a great film, mainly in the performances of Costner and McClane, which gave it a small amount of merit. Although to swing back the other way, at least Since You've Been Gone didn't make me feel ill afterwards. It's a tough call this week, but rumour has it had slightly more going for it, so that gets the win. Although actually, given that this week is looking for the worst film, I'm going to have to give the win, in inverted commas, to Since You've Been Gone. Congratulations! You suck!
I hope that someone gets my. I hope that someone gets my. I hope that someone gets my message to the podcast.
Freya got back in touch with the show with an email with lots of great points on how she felt I can improve the show, so thank you for those, Freya. She also suggested a few topics. I particularly like the sound of Shakespeare-inspired teen comedies and lesbian period dramas. They should be fun episodes to discuss. In other news, as I near 10 episodes, I'm working on ideas to bring in guests occasionally to change it up a bit. If you have any ideas for guests, then feel free to @ them on Twitter. A bit of gentle pressure never harmed anyone. As always, I'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch with me via email on somethingaboutsandifilmpod@gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube, just search for Something About Sandy, and it's SAS Film Pod on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. So that's it for another episode. Have you seen the films? Do you agree with my reviews? Or would you rather just go and watch Friends for the 15th time? Given the strength of these films, I won't blame you for going for the latter option. If you're enjoying this podcast, then please share it around with friends, family, social media followers, your postman, the guy on the bus, literally anyone. Just stop them in the street and force them to listen. Well, make sure you stay 2 meters away, of course. So, thank you very much for listening to this week's episode, and a special thanks goes to Joe Baker for all the music, and Alison Moore for the voiceover work. See you next time on the Something About Sandy Film Fight podcast.